I think the hardest thing any one of us can do is self-interrogation, and face ourselves on who we are and what we're about, and be willing to make changes, regardless of who you are or what you're into. If you're willing to make changes, and ultimately, I think we all know, we've all got a little list in our head of things that we'd like to change about ourselves or improve on or learn or stop doing. So I think the ultimate bravery is being able to do that, because you can hide from other people, but you can't hide from yourself.
Damien, thank you for your time. It's been fun organising this one. You're a busy man, for very good reasons, as opposed to just being busy. And for people who don't know your backstory, you've got a fascinating story in terms of how you came to the work you're doing now. And often, I guess it's a story that would be unlikely if you looked at your resume to be someone who is, well, I'll let you tell people what you do and how you got there.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Still got 10 fingers and 10 toes, mate. A couple of marbles
Yeah.
rolling around upstairs. As they say, big sky, little bullet. I spent a bunch of time in the military, 9 years altogether, my military career. After growing up on Australia's east coast, I was a diver, a clearance diver in the Australian Navy.
Yeah.
Signed up for a unit called Tactical Assault Group East, which was formed post September 11, and went on to sniper platoon there. Eventually, I went to Iraq. That was early 2005, and I spent
Mm.
about 3 years over there, sort of seeing,
Jesus.
probably the worst side of humanity. Uh, and looking back, being part of a system that destabilized a country, a region, and obliterated a culture. Um, or fighting the arguments of old men. You don't realize that at the time. At the time, it's about the mission, and more than the mission, it's about the guy next to you. We are part of a brotherhood, where the person you were alongside cared more about your life than you cared about yourself. And then when all of that stops and you lose the mission, you lose the brotherhood, you're out there on your own, you've got all these skills, not really. I mean, being a sniper is not really transferable back into civilian life. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
couple of people probably want to
Well,
give me
depends.
some cash jobs,
Yeah, it depends what
and
civilian life you're talking about.
yeah,
You
get a
could
bit of
take care
company
of
in the
you could
background
take
anyway.
care of my dog. You could take care of my dog right now. He's barking in the background.
It's all good, mate. We got three that'll be running around here. So if I can get away with this podcast without getting too interrupted, I'll be happy. So yeah, look, mate, I finished up in the military, and like many guys, a bit of a pretty steep downward spiral. I'd actually done quite well financially, and invested in residential property. So I didn't need to work for the foreseeable future. So there I was 29, financially secure, served in some of the most elite military units, survived 3 years of war, and took myself to South America for what was going to be a self-appointed sabbatical slash reward. And that went downhill pretty quick. Just drugs, alcohol, trying to fill the day, not using my brain, no purpose, no mission, and found myself, really rock bottom, I suppose. And I was one of the lucky ones that bounced when I hit rock bottom, and had heard about anti-poaching years before. Sounded like a romantic adventure, go and run around Africa and hunt some poachers. And you know, that was a selfish adventure that someone who's already ticked a bunch of boxes and doing some crazy shit. It's like, oh, what do you do next to get the next reel of photographs on your Instagram to try and impress people? The next story to tell it when you're standing around the bar at the pub next time with your mates back home. Yeah, so I joined the military for adventure, not to serve my country. I went to Iraq to make money, not to help the situation over there. And when I came to Africa, it was looking for a fight, not a cause. So it was a very selfish, self-centered set of choices, regardless of how anyone will look at my resume and go, "Oh, that was great, it was awesome, and thanks for your service." The reality was, it was self-centered, mate.
Most
Came
people would.
over.
Do you think most people who serve at that age would? I mean, it's more about adventure, I'd imagine, when you're a young kid.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah, I wish I could go back to my sort of 16, 17-year-old self and just ask why I was just. It's just on the football field, I was like the enforcer, and then just young kids always fighting and just stupid, like testosterone shit,
Yeah,
trying to prove yourself, constantly proving yourself, and then that feeds into the choices you make and the careers that you go down and the units that you try and get into. You're always trying to do more, which can be a great thing
mm,
in terms of self improvement. But I suppose you've got to look at the reasons behind it, and
mm,
we are all a product of our past. I wouldn't be here talking to you today about the work that we do if I hadn't um, gone through what I've been through, and
mm,
a lot of that self interrogation about like this macho bullshit that we try and build up around ourselves, and then other people recognize you as being that person, and then you're stuck in a cycle of having to
yeah,
to continuously live up to it. Um, so yeah, so when I came to Africa, I've started trying to get work, running around the bush doing anti-poaching, and I got closed doors everywhere, and for the right reasons. Nobody wanted some charlatan Aussie running around messing up a project they've just spent 2 decades building. And
mm,
I eventually got an opportunity to start working with a group of rangers in Zimbabwe. It was the fifth country that I'd traversed, trying to, knocking on doors, sitting around campfires, slowly starting to get an understanding that, hang on, there's a much bigger picture here than just running around trying to look for the next adventure. There's a real battle going on, a real war going on,
mm,
and one that had such limited resources. Having come from Iraq and seeing what was being thrown into fighting that war, and then coming over here and seeing uh, animals, which I'd never really cared about before, but being hunted by large groups using automatic weapons and military tactics. Just and the rangers that were trying to protect these animals just didn't have the basic resources, and it's just something started to click. Um, yeah, I don't know. Regardless of wherever I've been and whatever the motive was, and however selfish it has been, one thing I've never liked to see is people being picked on or bullied. Uh,
mm.
yeah, and I actually I did an interview of all things for a bloody fashion magazine in the Czech Republic years ago, and they said, "What do you think turned you into this alpha, as people like to say, and with the seek and destroy tattooed across the chest and serving in all these units?" And I was like, well, I've never been asked that question before. And I had to think because I didn't have the answer. And I remember when my parents separated when I was quite young, and I went to another school, and I used to get the shit kicked out of me every day at
Mm.
school. And one day I was just like, no, this isn't happening anymore. And then you got to, once you've taken that step and claimed your own ground to stand on, you've got to defend it. And that was the start of it all.
Mm. It's that I also feel that value that human beings have for right and wrong. For example, the majority of human beings, unless they're sociopaths, would agree that killing other human beings across the board is not something you do. Unless
Yeah,
there's, as you're well acquainted with, unless there's certain situations where you don't have an option. It's funny to me that we have that cognitive dissonance, that we don't apply that to everything that we share this earth with, that we've somehow,
yeah,
stratified all these different classes of beings. And the ones who are the most picked on are the ones we subjugate the worst. out of all. I mean, I'm not saying there's obviously horrific things that human beings go through, no doubt, and through the dawn of time, but to the point of where the animal agriculture has gotten to, it's nothing we've ever seen before.
Yeah, it was interesting, you know, because I grew up. Uh, well, actually, when I say grew up, I wasn't allowed
Not
to
a bad,
touch guns until I was
not a bad
18,
idea, Damien.
and legally. You know, so
Yeah.
parents never let me go shooting or hunting or anything like that. So as soon as I turned 18, I went and bought guns and you know, started hunting, and it was a way to try and, like, genuinely looking back, it was I was
Mm,
desperate for self identity and to be recognized and to further propel this self created alpha myth. And yeah, so it seems like this macho thing that you do. You know, you go out and you know the lads go hunting and you kill something, and it's like, yeah. So that's how I grew up. My mentality, and same mentality entering the military, uh, and probably not too dissimilar by the time I even arrived in Africa. But you know, Iraq has a way of breaking down the layers of armor and ego that you have around yourself when you see the worst of humanity and what we're capable of, and realizing that you're part of that machine. Um, but I did start to question my own choices in regards
mm,
to eating meat. But humans are great creatures of convenience. We will concoct the most amazing excuses to try and circumnavigate our own conscience in order to do something that suits our own agenda. And I did that with animals. You know, I'm out there protecting all these elephants and rhinos and giraffe and zebra and lions. You know, I I have a right to eat meat in the supermarket. Cows and chickens aren't going extinct. Uh, you know, they've been bred, they're put here for us. So I'd be out risking my life, actually, with the rangers we worked with, having to carry firearms to protect one group of animals, and then coming home and putting another group of animals on the fire every night. And that went on for quite some years. And, you know,
mm,
just in the end, mate, the truth is accumulative. And it just couldn't bullshit myself anymore. I mean, hey, people can get through life
mm.
and bullshit other people, but um, if you're bullshitting yourself, you just end up a hollow human being, and that's what I was doing. You know, it's like I didn't, you know, as this alpha male, um, who had signed up for conservation because I wanted to defend animals and protect nature. I was there supporting an industry that is responsible for the death of 100 billion animals a year or more, and is the greatest negative environmental impact on this planet. It's the meat industry, and so I was getting up on stage asking people to support us as an organisation, but wasn't really walking the values that I'd laid down for what I'd signed up for. And then one day I just said, enough is enough. You know, the only difference in the capacity of a rhino to suffer from a cow, or a chicken, or a lion, or a child is the difference we create in our own minds and allow ourselves to accept. And I not only didn't want to inflict pain on another animal, I didn't want to pay some other bloke to do it for me because I was too gutless to do it myself. So it's a very, you know, people say, oh, it's hard to go vegan or stop eating animals. It's actually not. You just stop sticking them in your mouth and it's done. Uh, you know, so best decision I ever made in my life. Um, it is the single most impactful thing we as individuals can do on this planet is to adopt a plant-based diet in terms of protecting the environment. And that's from the environmental side. You start to look at the ethical side. I don't, before I even get up out of bed each morning, I know that the choices that I've made the day before and will make this day impact the lives of animals in a positive way rather than a negative way, and that is a great conscience to wake up to.
Mhm. Have you noticed? I want to go on just quickly about the environmental impacts because there's so much disinformation on that when it comes to the arguments pushed by the meat industry, and it's
Yeah.
something you would have seen firsthand. But just quickly on going vegan and going plant based, did you notice? Look, it might sound a bit woo woo, but like a shift in your sensitivity and consciousness when you just started eating plants.
Mate, absolutely. It shifted my level of conscience, um, empathy, perception. Everything changed. And people say, oh, vegans, vegetarians, plant based. They like to get up on this soapbox, this high horse, and but the reality is, I actually do feel like a lot has changed in terms of the level of moral and ethics. But I mean, why the fuck would someone want to harm something that can't defend itself? And if you choose to do that, what genuine excuse is there um, to try and explain that and still maintain some sort of moral high ground? So it's look, people look the barriers go up very quickly when you start having the conversation because it cuts so straight to the nerve of people that don't want to hear it. And look, people ask me how we can keep pushing this movement forward. I said, just keep having your conversations, keep getting better at them because, as I was saying, the truth is accumulative. Some people will change overnight. Some people, like me, are stubborn and, you know, maybe won't want to listen to the truth initially. But once those shutters do come up, they'll never go down again. And if they do go down, the truth still lingers there, burning a hole. And we our movement can also be its own worst enemy too, because we're cutting straight to the core of discussing personal morals and personal ethics. Um, People get very defensive. It's like a lot of our movement who I love, and I love the passion, but it borders on like this militant level, where the perception is there's just zero room for mistakes, or you're out of the club kind of thing. And I think if people just started making a better effort to eat less animals, eat less animal products, um, look, we got a far better chance of getting a chunk of the world's population to eat less animals than we have of turning everyone vegan. That's just the reality of it. Um, ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings here. So all different shapes and sizes, and all different varying capacities of being able to tell ourselves one thing so we can believe it, that it will help us fulfill that self agenda.
God, I was going to go in two different directions, and I've lost both.
All right, mate.
Well, look, with the obvious thing for me when I think of it as a movement and a values determinator. When you look at slavery, for example, and how that unpopular that would have been at the time to tell
Yeah,
people they had to give up their slaves, and there was ended up obviously being a war over that. And it's not to say we still don't have slavery today, but it's still considered morally unacceptable. And
yeah,
it's the same in my eyes with what's happening with the movement to not kill other animals. Yet it's going to take look, it's just going to take a long time. And in my own experience, the more I've sort of dictated to people how I think it's wrong, it just pushes them away. Whereas the more I just hold my ground and live the way I live, and then tell people
yeah,
calmly why I do it, I've had so many people who I never would have thought come to me and ask me questions. Like, okay,
yeah,
because yeah, it's been very interesting.
yeah. I've become. mostly the same these days, because I just see the glaze go over. They don't want to discuss it. So if people want to ask questions, I'm happy to talk about it. Um, I'm not. I wouldn't call myself, a strong activist, other than just speaking about it, woven into my own narrative, and talking about um, my own journey, I suppose. It is the single most impactful thing I've done in my life, and it's not just because of animals, or it's the shift in conscience.
I still feel though every human being that there's a sense of no one thinks that harming animals is good. Like if you see a dog being
Yeah,
tortured, everyone in the West is up in arms. Yet
yeah,
the cognitive dissonance of not seeing that that is happening every to hundreds of animals every second.
yeah,
Uh, and not. I'll just tell a very quick story because it's really stuck with me because I was quite young. I always felt a sensitivity toward animals. I was a kid who got my parents to buy me encyclopedias on animals when I was younger, which is
yeah,
dating me. But like, and then it was funny when I was really young. I read about people killing poachers, and I thought that sounds amazing. Like that's like I couldn't think of a more worthy cause than people killing the people. I know it's much more nuanced and complicated, but
yeah,
in my childhood brain, I thought that sounded like the best thing ever. And so I always had that feeling toward animals needing, that you just didn't harm. It was beyond the pale of anything imaginable to harm them and to harm them intentionally. And I
mm,
remember when I was about 14, I was riding to school and I saw a guy who must have been in my age at the time walking this beautiful golden retriever, about 9 months old. It was still a puppy. I don't know. It wouldn't sit or do something. And he didn't see me and he just kicked it in the stomach. And this poor, beautiful being just yelped and cried. And I didn't even think. I just mounted the footpath and rode my bike as fast as I could into this guy.
awesome.
Just 'cause it's something in me, like it just
Yeah,
like I still get it.
yeah,
And as you
yeah,
know, like the rage
yeah,
you get when you see that, like that kind
yeah,
of thing. It was just blind
yeah,
rage.
yeah,
And he turned around to like, who's this? He was shocked. He fell over. I fell over, and he got up to punching them. He saw like, oh, it's a kid, and I said something like, "What the fuck are you doing, kicking a dog?" And I'll never forget
yeah,
like having a kid tell you that, and there was just shame on his face, like he knew how wrong that was,
yeah,
and he let that. And I think that exists within all of us, but it's like how do you tap in?
yeah,
Like it shouldn't be shame, but how do you tap into that
yeah,
innate feeling that we all have? So people make that connection. Like it's just I feel
yeah.
that when people are doing that, there's just not that connection.
Which the disconnect that exists between consuming a product and the reality it takes to bring that product to market.
Yeah, it,
It's if it was happening to humans, we'd call it torture,
yeah,
and murder. Um, it's we've just created laws and barriers and guardrails around these industries, heavily subsidized, by governments without taxpayers' money,
mm,
and the show goes on. However, we're at a pretty interesting time in history. I think it's a great time to be alive. We've got the fight of our civilization on our hands here. 99.9% of species that have ever existed on this planet,
yeah,
over the last 5+ billion years, are extinct. Where we go as a species from here is going to be determined on our willingness to preserve biodiversity, and biodiversity at mass. We're accelerating into the sixth mass great extinction. And for the first time in history, it's a human created phenomenon. Um, all of that aside, wherever we end up, and however much longer we're graced with being on this planet, as a species, uh, at some point we're going to look back and we're going to say, what
yeah,
what were we thinking?
yeah.
What were we thinking, and how did it ever get to that level of suffering that we surrounded ourselves with and turned our bodies into graveyards, and dug the grave of our civilization with these unfounded appetites. And I suppose when it comes time, at least I'll be able to sit back and say I was on the right side of history.
Mm,
And I don't care what I've heard all the excuses. I've made half of them up. There's no excuse.
yeah. Well, it's an interesting. I like doing it as a thought process before doing things. Of just like what ancestor am I going to be thought of by future generations? Because we're so arrogant in each time that we're in that we think we're at the absolute pinnacle of human knowledge and advancement and understanding, and
Yeah,
then give it 50, 100 years, and people look back and go, what on earth were you people thinking, you
yeah,
lunatics?
oh, yep,
And then we think that that's not going to happen to us. It's just like, of course, it's going to happen to us.
yeah. No, it's
But I mean,
yeah. Sorry, mate.
no, sorry, go on. No, no, I was just going to say it's the positive to that is hopefully that we're always moving forward, toward more awareness of how we're
Yeah,
behaving.
you'd like to.
You
You know,
certainly, yeah, I'm always an optimist.
self, evolution. I always like to say, nature's taken billions of years to evolve, cutting
Yeah.
away the bits that don't work, keeping the bits that do. We don't have billions of years as individuals. We've got maybe a handful of decades um, at best, and to do as much as we can in the time we have on this planet. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, me cutting that out of my life was a huge step in the right direction.
So speaking of time on this planet and what you've done, I mean, you've done an awful amount. Like, what is your predominant focus now, uh, and the effects it's having? And look, I for the listeners, I was just spent
Yeah.
today looking at all the incredible stats that you've managed to achieve, and it's quite remarkable.
Thanks, mate. So, look, my entry into conservation was very much fell into cadence with the law enforcement side of that responsibility, which was anti-poaching. And in 2009, set up a non-profit called the International Anti-Poaching Foundation. It was designed to be the last line of defence for animals that were being targeted
Mm.
with some of the most aggressive tactics. In uh, 2017, we'd scaled up a lot as an organisation. We're taking on larger projects, working with multiple governments across various countries in Southern Africa. But we were having this ongoing war with the local community, a local population. Uh, I just like what we were doing was working, but it wasn't scalable, and um, yeah, no, it wasn't right. I used to get up every, on stage, and I'd say, don't think of what we're doing as a solution. Think of it as like we're stopping the hemorrhaging. Think of
Yeah.
we like a paramedic trying to get the situation to the operating table. And that's all we were doing. We're just holding on to what was left in these areas that we were working. But the cost of that was this ongoing conflict. And, just, I'd come from conflict zones. We were like an occupying force. And without a genocide, a complete genocide, there's very few examples in history of an occupying force having a long term good relationship with
Mm.
a local population. And so I set about trying to figure out how to rebuild the broken bridge between conservation and communities. On a continent that's going to have 2
Yeah.
billion people by 2040, it'll be people that decide the future of conservation, not bigger fences and more guns. Um, our research started to show us that there was an overwhelming body of evidence that told us empowering women was the single greatest force for positive change in the world today.
You're
Having
right.
come from the ultimate boys' club of special
He really
operations,
wants to
having
mow that
served in
lawn.
all male military units that never deployed with women, and working in a conservation industry where women were outnumbered operationally on the ground at a ratio of up to 100 to 1. And so we found this other examples in the conservation industry where women were given certain access um, to conservation roles, but never the full access. And so, we even saw an all female anti poaching unit that we knew was limited in their roles, and we're getting all the credit for doing every role. But there was
Mm.
actually an all male armed security team that was doing the dangerous work inside the park. And it was like, but well, what if women could just do it all? We could take the largest line items in our budgets, which is salaries that were paid to staff, and those salaries would go into the hands of women who spend 80 to 90% of their salary on family and local community
Mm.
versus a male that spends 30 to 40%. So like from a pure economic standpoint, it stacked up. Operationally, we didn't know if it was going to work. We we actually had closed doors in 7 different places that we were trying to get this project off the ground. Nobody wanted to take the risk of a woman doing a traditional male role, one of the toughest, hardest jobs in the world in remote and hostile locations in a very patriarchal
Yeah, I
society.
was just going to ask you that. Yeah.
And eventually, ironically, we found an abandoned trophy hunting reserve in Zimbabwe. Um, Trophy hunting areas are in what are known as secondary protected areas. They fall outside of national parks, which fall under federal mandate. Um, National parks make up about 30% of Africa's natural capital. Secondary protected areas make up the other 70%. So, for
Yeah.
many communities, hunting had been a historic economic driver to help protect those areas. They would sell hunts to foreigners to come over and shoot lion and leopard and elephant and rhino, whatever. Um, but hunting is dying a natural death in many areas. And there's an increasing amount of land that was previously reserved for hunting that is now vulnerable to being lost to agriculture and human settlement. And if you look at 70% of Africa's natural capital at threat of being lost, this is one of the greatest environmental disasters unfolding on the planet. We wanted to look at hunting as an equation to be solved, not an argument to be had.
Mm.
We can go back and forth all day on the pros and cons, the practicalities, the ethical debate. The reality is the argument doesn't matter. There's less people that want to hunt. There's less animals to hunt, and there's tougher regulation and policy separating the product from the customer. So whether people like it or not, the industry's in decline. We don't need debate. We actually need solutions. And so we saw an opportunity in this, what was a blank canvas. Hunting had failed commercially there. We went and spoke with the traditional leadership, local government, and said we want to trial this program here and recruit women from the local communities. They're like, yeah, we'll give you 3 days. Okay, we had to negotiate this time frame, and so it was 3 days because they thought that would be enough time to determine that this project would fail, and we would revert back to hiring men and give men jobs. We were only given a very short time to start this 3-day program, and we did selection, a pre-selection interviews with women that came from the local community. Now, when I first arrived in Zimbabwe, it had the lowest life expectancy in the world for a woman. It's less than 40 years of age. And so when
Jesus
we
Christ.
started this program, we thought, let's create opportunities for those that deserve it the most. And they were survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers, and abandoned wives. And what we didn't realise when those first 87 women came down was that anything we were going to put them through was nothing compared to what they came from or stood to go back to.
Yeah.
They'd had it bloody tough as it gets. And we, from those 37, we chose, from the 87, we chose 37 and started this 72-hour selection course. And at the end of that, we chose 16 women that went on to start this program, and they named themselves Akashinga, which means the brave ones, which subsequently became the name of our organisation as that project grew from an initial 16 women to a staff of almost 1,000 people now. Protecting over 5 million hectares of at-threat wilderness, all areas that were previously reserved for trophy hunting, where we've either, in partnership with the community, bought out the hunting companies or the rights to hunt on those lands and retain the rights to not exercise them and not shoot animals.
What did I read? Is you've had a 90% reduction in poaching? Something extraordinary.
90% reduction in elephant poaching. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
was in the mid to lower Zambezi Valley. So Paul Allen, one of his big projects before he passed was to do what was called the Great Elephant Census and ascertain what elephant populations were remaining on the continent. And they determined that in the previous 16 years prior to Akashinga starting in where we work in the mid to lower Zambezi Valley of Zimbabwe, or where the program started, there'd been 8,000 elephants killed, or about 40% of the population. And from the data that we've been able to get our hands on and collect ourselves, and through our partners, we've seen a 90% reduction in those numbers
Mm.
since this program started.
It's such a more intelligent way to approach these situations to create real solutions for people. I a couple of years ago did a trail run for the Bob Brown Foundation.
Yeah.
Does a lot of work with logging in Tasmania, and it was just really interesting. So you go to you run through the Tarkine down there, and you're in the community. So you go to the place where the community is, where there's a lot of logging, and there's instant. They don't want you there, obviously, because you're running to raise money to preserve these forests. And then you go to these towns, these small little towns, and just driving through them, it struck me like they're so economically backward and impoverished, and there's no opportunity there for the kids to make anything, and the only opportunity is
Yeah.
logging. So it's completely understandable that these people are going to defend what little they have against, guys like me coming from the city to do a little
Yep.
run to raise. And look, I'm not sure, obviously, of the inner workings of the Bob Brown Foundation, but it just struck me as like the clearest way is to obviously invest in these. The only way that's going to create substantial, lasting change is to get the community on board,
Yeah.
economically invest, and create tourism out of this incredible, some of the most spectacular scenery I've ever seen,
Yeah.
and create wealth and tourism and opportunity and all the other things, rather than, I feel like with any of when you're labeled as when you're fighting somebody on this, when you're an advocate doing advocacy work and fighting, it gets you nowhere, because like
Yeah.
what's the result going to be, unless it's not, you might have a short-term win, but people still live there and they're still going to need work.
Yeah. It was, looking at the realization that, I'm a slow learner sometimes, but realizing that conservation is not a conservation issue, it's a social issue. When you have social
Yeah.
impact, you'll have a conservation outcome. And that for me, and looking at it from a completely different perspective, 180 degrees actually, going from being inside a reserve looking out on how we're going to defend these areas, to being outside shoulder to shoulder with the community on how do we motivate these people to see that the long-term preservation of wildlife is going to be more important than poaching and cutting down trees. There was a few things about our program that made it scalable. And in the process, we had a small group of women achieve what very few armies in history have been able to do, and that's win the hearts and minds of a local community. Um, we've had zero corruption with the women. And some of the countries we work in are some of the most corrupt places on the planet. So,
Yeah.
taking corruption out of our daily planning in regards to the operational side of what we do is we're already halfway home to achieving our mission. Um, the second thing is women bring a different value system to law enforcement and conflict. And yeah, look, I've built a career across 3 continents in training men for armed combat, frontline deployment, law enforcement, conservation, and I can sit here and say, women generally, not to generalize too much, they just bring a different value system into that role. They de-escalate. situations that would otherwise very easily antagonize. Now, when you de-escalate, you demilitarize. So we went from having helicopters and drones and military-grade hardware. We found something far more powerful than biceps and bullets, and it was relationships. These women that were raised from these communities, in these communities, and raising their own families in these communities, they had a long-term vested interest in in maintaining a harmony. And I mean, if you want to look at it from a purely military or a counterinsurgency standpoint, which is a tactic in counterinsurgency, if you win the women, you win the household, and when you win the household, you start to win the hearts and minds of the community. And so we hadn't planned all of that, you know, the ways that this was going to unfold. And we're definitely not fighting a counterinsurgency war here. We're trying to protect the heart and lungs of the planet. But it's just interesting that, you know, when we have, well, I did a talk in Chicago a few years ago, and I had the senior advisor to the Chicago police force come up and say, look, you know, we're desperate. We're looking for something different, you know. I said, well, you know, there's only so many times you can kick someone's door in at 3 o'clock in the morning and have a gun barrel and a torch in their face, and then turn around and try and you know have a hearts
Conversation.
and minds conversation the next day. Um, you know, and it's very hard to go and get rid of an entire police force, replace it with women, and see what happens. We had these blank canvases, you know, huge areas the size of small countries, where hunting had failed. There were no staff. It wasn't like we were firing people and replacing them with women. We just had a blank canvas to go and trial this and see what happened. And you know, there were definitely the benefits that have flown out of this. It just we didn't script it. You know, we became the students along the way, and figuring out, you know, how to improve this, how to adjust it. But ultimately, it became scalable. And you know, as a person whose life purpose is wanting to protect as much of the natural world as possible, finding a solution that was scalable, is yeah. It's if this is all I did for the rest of my life, I'd be a happy man.
What have you seen in the communities now with the men, out of interest? Like, how have you seen that how have the men changed with
So
this?
look, some of the initial feedback we got when we started to scale was you've got to give some of the jobs to men. You know, so we have I can say exactly we have 918 staff and contractors. More than 99% of those come from Africa. Um, More than 95% come from within 20 kilometres of the boundary of the area that we protect.
Yeah.
63% of our entire workforce is women. Okay, so there's no other organisation in conservation that has a ratio like that, and with the ground operational responsibilities that we have. So we're shifting the paradigm in terms of creating access for women to come into this industry and become leaders in their communities, in their fields, in their industries. Um, these are communities where women have historically lacked access to the experience necessary to be able to rise up into leadership positions. We've had to be building the pipeline the entire way along, for women to be able to rise up into these power positions of law enforcement, decision making, and management. Um, you know, in many cases, they have moved up and taken those positions. In other cases, they're being mirrored by some of the most experienced men on the continent in the work that they do. Because you can teach as much as you want, but you can't fast track one thing, and that's experience. And
Mm.
so, building out these leadership pipelines, also creating jobs for men in the local communities, but changing perception. There's been like this form of social reengineering that's been beautiful to watch, and to see the way that particularly young boys, look at these women. You know, they've got conservation clubs at the schools. The women go and talk to kids, young boys and young girls. We've got scholarship programs in Zimbabwe alone. We've got over 200 underprivileged children, 70% of whom are girls, that are fully sponsored for school. 27
It's amazing.
teachers that are sponsored as well, in areas that would otherwise have class sizes of 60 to 70 children, rebuilding schools, rebuilding clinics, providing clean water, providing jobs. All of this starts to make the community see that, hang on, this isn't just a bunch of people um, with some guns trying to protect these trees, and we don't really understand why they want to hold on to these trees when we could be using it for X, Y, and Z. Uh, Africa is ground zero. It's a continent that stands to lose the most natural capital in the coming years. We need to find ways to protect it, and the only way to do that is to get the community to buy in.
It'd be strong.
And so, when we stop spending money on helicopters and drones and all that, and our operational costs were cut by 2/3 because it was far cheaper to have a relationship than it was to have a war. We started pumping money back into these community programs, and the relationship just built from there.
Are the areas the teams are protecting? Are you open to tourism? Is like what's a form aside from people? Because I know you're obviously a non-profit. Are there other
Yeah,
avenues of income now available?
yeah. Look, we have a couple of camps, mate, but it's not like hunting. It's usually not the sexy areas, hunting areas. Um, that's why they've been reserved for hunting, because you might have one or two people that go out there at a time, as opposed to a place like Victoria Falls
Yeah.
or Mana Pools or the Serengeti, where you're getting high volumes of tourists to come out to these iconic places. Um, Now, they may not be the sexy areas or the really well known areas, but they are of equal biodiversity importance, pound for pound.
Mm.
However, they make up far greater proportions of the landscapes of the areas we protect, because it's the 30% national park versus the 70% secondary protected area. Um, so they are the connective tissue across landscapes. They often surround national parks, providing a buffer, and I don't think a buffer is a kind enough term for an area of such importance. Most importantly, they sit on the peripherals of large ecosystems, which gives you the footprint with which to have the social relationship. And that is where these ecosystems are either going to be won or lost, is through that social relationship.
Yeah. It sounds very much to me a case of you've also, as a byproduct, reinstated like true eldership for the youth to model off. Which with true values which support the community and long term fulfillment and happiness. And it's something we're completely bereft of in the West. Like if I remember, and I'm sure your childhood was the same. Like when you reach a certain age, it's like, okay, fuck off now, go get pissed with your mates and
Yeah,
make sense of this somewhat meaningless world. And it's not to criticize parents or elders that they weren't probably given it very. I mean, they came out of the Second World War, so that they don't,
yeah,
their parents were just trying to survive. But yeah, it's desperately needed for, I find, particularly for the youth to have this elders to look up to who actually embody
yeah,
something that has value and meaning for generations to come, as opposed to get yourself a Lambo and go eat some steaks
yeah,
and you'll be happy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I tell my kids, the important things in life are not things, they're actions, the relationships, the way you treat other people. That's the important stuff. And when you go into the communities and you hear the elders and the traditional leaders talk about seeing animals that they hadn't seen in these areas for decades, and going in and sitting with the conservation clubs at the schools and talking about how these animals have come back, and a lot a lot of these cultures here, they have the totem animal, so it is connected to them spiritually, and to be seeing some of those animals that they are spiritually connected to coming back in.
To return.
The
Wow.
flip side too, you see things I couldn't have imagined, and pleasant surprises along the way. I get summons to the chief of police office, um, he wants to talk about something, and I'm like, okay, what is it this time? Because we run a large, widely dispersed armed force across multiple countries. We do get a lot of very well justified um, scrutiny and partnership with various government departments. And he said, grab a seat, in his office, and he showed me the charts on the wall where he keeps all these stats for the year. He said, you realise since this program started, there's been a 70% reduction in gender-based violence towards women in these communities alongside the areas where you're
Oh,
working.
that's
And it's just,
amazing.
and it's just a shift in, perception of not only what was perceived to be a woman's role in
Mm.
society, but just creating the one thing they never had, an opportunity for them to demonstrate exactly what it is they they've got. And I think if women are given more opportunities in Africa, they're going to save far, far more than its ecosystems.
Yeah, I'm blown away by that. That's uh, as a testament to, I think, when you find in your own life, when you do the right thing, like when you do that thing from a genuine value and a
Yeah,
heart based perspective, whether that's changing what you eat, the knock on effects, just say for your health. There's all these things that you
yeah,
didn't necessarily anticipate that will happen
yeah,
from leading a life like that.
yeah, yeah. It is. It's just try and interestingly, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Game Changers.
Oh no, I
They've
did.
got
Yeah, yeah.
all
I
the
think I think
athletes in there, and I actually I'd never done it from a nutritional um, self-beneficial way. Of course,
yeah,
the conscience side of it is very self-beneficial. I mean, I do try and eat relatively healthy, but when I go
yeah.
to America or Australia, we don't
It's,
have
go-
vegan shops
it's
here or vegan section in the supermarket. It's called the fruit and veggie section.
yeah,
So when I do go overseas, I like getting stuck into the
you
fake meats,
indulge.
the cheeses,
Yeah,
and all that because we don't have it here. Um, but I also love to cook, so I enjoy making a bunch of that stuff from scratch too.
yeah. I think when you look at all of the sensationalism around, say, a plant-based diet and a vegan diet, and all these people who, I, from my standpoint, if you don't do it from that initial, so I'm the same. I did it before I knew anything about the health side of.
Yeah,
Actually, when I first went, I was vegetarian for a long time, and then went vegan. And when I
yeah,
did both of those, uh, I was told, and all the stuff I could find online, well, your health is going to suffer. But I was only purely doing it because I cared so
yeah,
much about the animals, I couldn't not do it. And I feel like if that's your fundamental mooring, you're not going to just jump boat because you've
yeah,
done it for a trend, or some celebrities now not vegan anymore, and
yeah,
all of the bollocks you see with that. And it is irritating because I think I said at the start, and I think you said it as well, but like it's a value. It's not something you're doing because it's a fad or it's a self-interested, I'm going to be healthier if I do X.
yeah,
It's like, no, it's a fundamental value of how I choose to live my life.
yeah.
um
Yeah, it's yeah, interesting you say that. I think I don't have a spreadsheet with data, but I notice that people that do seem to slip back into old habits are generally ones that had done it because it was for a health or a diet
mm,
trend, as opposed to the true understanding of the suffering that it causes animals and the environmental degradation that it's responsible for.
mm. Yeah, undeniable. Despite what you may see on TikTok, like the
Yeah,
Amazon is being cut down, people. Not
yeah,
so you're getting your grass fed, but it's like literally gross. That soy crop's not been eaten by bloody vegans. It's been eaten by the cows in those feedlots. So, like,
yeah. I stopped my flat earthing mindset some years ago and
the
just listen to the science.
oh, you God, you could lose a lot of time on the flat Earth. Tell you that much. I've had a few conversations around here. It's been like hour coffees with some person I hardly know, showing me schematics of how the Earth's flat. I'm like, yeah, it is Byron Bay though, so you do get that shit.
Yeah,
Look, I'm conscious of your time, Damien. I want to let you go. I'd just like to finish look on two things. Like, firstly, what's next for the organization? Like, and yeah, expansion plans and what's coming up, and also how people can help you and how to get in touch.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So we we've had rapid growth over the last 2 to 3 years. Specifically, this year is a year of consolidation and built. We've gone out and done these long-term deals with local communities to protect these former trophy hunting areas. So we're in the process now of, in varying stages, different countries that we operate and areas within those countries of building those programs out and consolidating a lot of systems, building out the foundation as an organisation for further growth. So
Mm,
that is a key focus this year. Um, in slight contradiction to that too, we're also a founding partner of what's called the Conservation Landscape Alliance, ourselves, another organisation called Conserve Global, and Rewild, so Leonardo DiCaprio's foundation, and we plan to help secure within a decade an area equivalent to about the size of the state of Texas in the United States. It's one of
yeah,
the largest
incredible.
conservation ambitions on the planet, and it's an alliance of organisations that are becoming together with a similar interest of centralising social impact as a fundamental part of community-led conservation to drive ecosystem and landscape scale protection across the continent.
I mean, it sounds like you've literally created a model which can be rolled out successfully throughout the world,
Yeah,
provably.
it's look, mate. There's still a lot of work to be done. I suppose it's one of those sort of founder syndrome things that you never satisfied. But I do get opportunities for self reflection and a bit of
Mm,
grace, here and there, mate. I am proud of it. I've got 3 kids. I read a quote once that said, "In the end, it'll be our children that judge us the hardest." And to be able to take them out, show them the work that's been done, explain to them why, to be able to travel with them and show them the best classroom in the world, which is the world, and the best backyard we
yeah,
have, which is nature. Um, yeah, it's a great privilege. At the same time, live on the other side of the world here. I'm a long way from home, mate. But this is the choice, and I couldn't be more fulfilled. So
yeah,
um, yeah, and it's we're just part of a big machine as an organization, as an industry. There's people like yourself that are helping us tell our story. There's lawyers that draft up contracts. There's nurses that stitch up our rangers when they get hurt. There's accountants. There's bookkeepers. There's graphic designers doing posters for fundraisers. There's cooks, logistics. Every one of those jobs is as important as each other, because if you start pulling cogs out of the machine, it breaks down. And at the top of that machine is the tip of the spear, is the rangers who are out there on the front lines defending the natural world on behalf of a global community.
yeah. Your team's doing a good job. You got a great site too. You got a really great front facing. Yeah, everything's and speaking from someone looking from the outside in, like the work you've done and all the team, it's just it's mind blowing how much you've achieved in a relatively short
Yeah,
period of time.
I appreciate it, Paul. Thanks very much, mate. Yeah, if anyone does want to have a look at our work, akashinga.org, as it sounds, Akashinga, one word. Yeah, have a look, read up.
Entry too, which I can. You've got an amazing TED talk from quite a while ago now, and there's also that documentary came out about 4 years ago or something, wasn't it? From
Yeah, and
Akashinga.
actually,
Yeah.
Channel 7 Spotlight just did a really good update
Oh, have they?
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you the link
Oh,
after if you
awesome.
want to
Send
attach
me
it. It's
that.
probably
I'll put that in. Yeah.
that's probably the best update we've got at the moment on the
What's
organisation
happening?
and what we're up to. Yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of
Damon,
visuals.
okay, I'd love to. Oh, yeah, please do. That's, but I'd just love to finish very quickly on because it's something. Look, it's just a annoyance of mine when I see so much of this new supposed, I think men in the West in particular feel like they're being marginalized from roles of their previous roles of protectors, and in
Yeah.
modernity, it feels like they're looking for new ways of how to be men, and I
Yeah.
see a lot of that being represented in, okay, well, that means growing beards and eating as much meat as possible and doing and getting your
Yeah.
squat up and your bench press up. That's masculinity, and picking and getting a notch count on your bed to the absolute maximum it could possibly be, and
Yeah.
make a couple of $1 million. So you're somebody, objectively speaking, in terms of what, in terms of the things you've done are very difficult, hard, things that historically would be considered masculine traits: going to war, seeing suffering, protecting people, and now what you're doing. What the question from all that rambling is, what is your view of what masculinity is in today's world?
Uh, I, I try to get in the habit of everything I do before I do it, whether it's a thought or an action, just saying, is this right or is this wrong? Ultimately,
Yeah.
asking my conscience that, and you know, if you say something's wrong and you still do it, you got to live with that, and it I think the hardest thing any one of us can do is self-interrogation, and face ourselves on who we are and what we're about, and be willing to make changes. Um, yeah, regardless of who you are or what you're into, if you're willing to make changes, and ultimately, I think we all know. We've all got a little list in our head of things that we'd like to change about ourselves or improve on or learn, or stop doing. So I think, the ultimate bravery is being able to do that, because as I was saying before, you can hide from other people, but you can't hide from yourself, and confronting yourself, and all the little skeletons in the closet. Um, yeah, just digging those out and dealing with them. And after the career I've had, and the person I was, it's definitely very hard to confront that and to change it. Whether it's stopping to eat meat or whether it's trying to change an industry, to look at different models, where historically there was no place for women really on the front lines. Just giving yourself the grace to try new things, and own up to yourself about the difference between right and wrong.
Facing your fears is probably the most difficult thing I think you do as a human being, with
Yeah,
honesty. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The greatest fear for so many people would be facing up to the things that we perhaps know aren't right.
Hmm. Well, Damien, you're doing a lot of right, and yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I was so looking forward to talking to you as well. I've sort
Nah,
of
well,
known about your work for a long time, and
thank you
yeah,
very much, mate.
thanks so much. And if for everyone listening, everything will be in the show notes for how to support, and yeah, I highly
Awesome,
recommend.
mate. Thank you, Paul. Cheers, mate. Thank you for the work, and thank you for having me on.
Pleasure.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank